Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we're here taking a preview look at Sigil, Powers of War from Breaking Teeth Games. This game has a little bit of magic, a little bit of tactical board games all in one, and it pulls it off pretty well.
Yeah, it is a card-driven tactical war game, very much like Magic, completely asymmetrical. Each of the different factions that you're using plays entirely different, has unique abilities to them. The base game alone will have 4 factions in it, all of them having their own strengths and weaknesses. There's even coalitions between them, so you can mix and match
kind of cool.
some of the decks together to have kind of a Magic feel where you have to have specific kinds of mana to bring certain kinds of creatures into play. It's cool. And the game that we've actually played, it's a fun game. It feels very much like Magic. It feels like you're using your mana, you're creating characters, you're bringing them into play, and you're using dice in this case to battle. But they all have their own unique abilities and
yeah, it definitely feels like what I'd say is the natural sort of evolution of Magic onto the table with some pieces. Obviously, it's been attempted.
Yeah.
I think this one does it even better than some of the ones that have been out there.
Yeah. So here's how the game works. It's actually really, really simple. Each player will start with one of the 4 base factions in the game. They will have their own deck of 40 cards. Mm-hmm. This comes standard. Now, there will be some support cards that you can add in and shake things out as you so wish.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of deck building if you want there to be.
Absolutely, especially when you start mixing and matching the decks together. With those 40 cards, you'll shuffle them up and you'll draw 5 of them. You're going to pick one warlord to lead your faction into battle. Now, the game will come with 2 different warlords, and then there will also be future warlords that you can be used within the game. Now, each of these warlords has their own. Well, all of the cards and all the units will have their own standee that represents those particular cards. But the warlords themselves will have a placard, so to speak, that will tell you all their special abilities, how many units can be in play at a time. Now, this is special for the warlords. Each warlord can control a specific number of units or standees in the game.
Right.
And when they die, which you don't want them to die, they get turned over to the other side. They can command less units, and they're no longer available to be used in battle.
Exactly.
And then also, your Sigil, which is your home base, will lose 1 point every round. And the whole goal of the game is to destroy the other person's sigil.
Yeah, to destroy the sigil. It's not the warlord, in fact. You can lose the warlord. It just affects the game. I like the fact that it's not just like go after that one guy and kill him. You've got the sigil. The warlord, in the game we played, I lost my warlord pretty quickly, and it has a pretty significant impact on things. Your sigil starts ticking down, but also there's some really juicy powers on that warlord that you'll miss.
In the games that we have played, we only have enough components here for a 2-player game. This game can be played multiplayer, where each player is fighting against each other. It can be played in coalition format. It can be played 3-player, where each player is trying to defeat a specific person.
Yeah, it's got some cool variants, and from all the playtesting that we've heard has taken place on this, a lot of those variants are some of the favorites of a lot of the people who've been playing it.
Yeah. Each player will also place their sigil. The sigil goes in a very particular mark on the board, and then you'll place your warlord directly behind your sigil to start, and each player will do that. You're also going to place a 20-sided die over top your sigil that reflects the amount of hit points that are available to to your sigil. Of course, when you destroy the other person's sigil, that marks the end of the game, and you've won. There's also mana generators. They come in 2 availabilities. You have common mana generators. These are all reflected by the cards that you bring into play. And then on the other side are heroic mana generators.
And this is one of the cool aspects that I don't think we've seen in some of the other attempts at this sort of game, where they actually have the mana playing a significant role. You're physically putting out the mana generators, not only in card form, but they take a place on the board, and those can be attacked in most cases. There are some factions that have some mana generators that can't be destroyed.
That's right.
But when you have someone out there destroying one of those mana generators and it gets taken off the board and you lose the card and you're not producing that mana, it definitely brings that same sort of flavor that you've experienced in the original Magic.
Yeah, I mean, it also ties in directly to your strategical options. The more mana generators you have, the more places you can spawn your your summons in and have board control. Within the deck, you have a variety of different cards. You have your summon cards, which reflect all the units in the game. Units have 4 different kinds of things. They have movement, they have attack, which is how many dice they roll. They have defense, which again is how many dice they roll in defense. And then they have a number of health. And then each of these units also have possible special abilities built into the card, either by text or by an icon in the upper left-hand corner that says a special ability, such as range or flight. Also in here, you have spells, which will be used as interrupts. During each of the phases in the game, you can play an interrupt at a specific time in order to affect the game. All interrupts, everything costs mana in the game. You have auras, which are played to your side of the board. Those are permanents. They can either be placed to your side of the board and give you a universal effect, or they can be placed on a unit or warlord to give that unit or warlord a specific effect.
Right.
So here's how the game works. There are 8 phases in a round. To start off the game, each player will draw 5 cards, and we have a game in progress already. 5 cards. If you don't have any mana generators in your hand, you're allowed to mulligan or redraw up to twice. And then, starting off with the first player, the player will draw cards, so they'll go back up to 1 card, or 1 more card, and then they have the mana phase.
Right.
Depending upon how many sigils and mana generators they have out, they accrue that much mana into their pool, and mana will be carried over from round to round if it's not used.
Yeah, and you're taking these little crystals, which I have to say, when you're taking a game like this to a more tactile format, having things like this representing the mana is just a nice touch.
Yeah.
You have it in front of you. You can always look at it. Your opponents can see what you have going on over there. And you're basically generating 1 mana for free. And then one, depending on what mana generators you have out there, more mana for it.
Yeah. Then you have the action phase or the summon phase. And you're allowed to summon, just like Magic the Gathering, you summon as much stuff as you want, up to the limit of the amount of mana that you have, right? Anytime you summon, now, you can only bring in 1 new mana generator each round. When you place a mana generator, it's very simple. You can go within 3 spaces of your sigil. That's called your sigil territory. Other players cannot place any mana generators in your sigil territory. Also, you can put a mana generator adjacent to your warlord. So this is why keeping your warlord alive is good, because they can start to spread out within the game to gain board control. And then you're allowed to cast any summons that you so wish. When you cast a summon, they have to be placed adjacent to either your sigil or adjacent to any of your mana generators in play. Like Magic, you have Summoning Sickness. You can't move. You can't attack with anything that you bring in to play that specific turn.
Exactly. Then it moves on to the movement phase.
Yep.
And the movement, again, unlike some of the similar games, you're moving every one you can move. You're not picking one unit or just the warlord and moving that.
Right.
You get to use the movement points for each and every unit that you have out there.
Right. Now, movement, you move up to, as David said, the amount of movement. For instance, my goblin grunts here have 5 movement. Now, there is a very specific rule that when you move adjacent to another faction, you have to stop. So if I were to go next to Sven here, my movement has to stop.
Right.
However, if you start your turn next to a opponent, you are allowed to move away or around him to get on the other side since you've started adjacent. You can't move through other characters. You can't move through mana generators. You can't move through sigils. So everything pretty much blocks. Flying is the only way to get through those areas. And then you go into combat. Combat is a 3-phase tier. When you're doing combat, it's basically dice.
Dice against dice. Yeah. And you're going to start with, I think, you basically go with the ranged combat first.
Yep.
So they kind of treat that as its own little sort of mini segment. And the interesting thing about combat is you're not going unit by unit. So you take any ranged unit in this phase that's attacking another unit.
Right.
You're going to gather all the dice that they would have as sort of a group and roll them all at once.
Right.
And then your opponent's going to roll his defense dice.
Right. Once range combat is done, you're going to compare your attack to their defense, and if it's more hit points than the base stat of that particular unit, that unit is lost along with the card. The card goes to the discard pile. The unit's thrown back out. Now, melee combat's a little bit different. It also uses dice. You have to be adjacent. However, you can have retaliation attacks. So, for instance, if I'm rolling 5 dice against David and he has a 3 defense, It's 5 against his 3 defense. He could block all of my attacks that come through, but any attacks that he generated from that defense can retaliate back to me. And if I don't have any defense on my dice that I rolled, those will do actual damage. And each of these dice are the same. They have an X number of offense on here, which is 3 and 2 defense, and then a blank side as well. So you can actually get into some trouble by doing melee combat to someone who's adjacent to you.
I lost a few units to you from retaliation damage, which is cool because it makes you think a little bit more about the attacks and when you're going to go on offense and when it's maybe a little smarter to not.
Now, during the 7th phase, there is an additional action phase, which you can summon additional creatures. Now, this is important for defensive reasons. You can't bring in mana generators during this turn, but you can, if you have mana left over, bring in units to block people or to buff your other units or to create a buffer zone between you and your warlord and whatnot, or even direct line to your sigil. And then you end your turn. If you have any more than 7 cards, you have to discard down, and then it's the next player's turn. You just rinse and repeat this over and over until someone's sigil is destroyed. Now, you can attack other people's mana generators, which is a really good idea because it, of course, lessens their ability to bring in new units. When you attack a mana generator, it has no inherent defense. You just have to do 7 hit points to it in one round.
Right. So unlike the units, it doesn't carry hit points or damage from round to round.
Yep.
The units, you're going to put a die or a marker on them to show how much damage they took if they didn't die. With these, it's 7. It's all or nothing.
Yeah.
So which is nice because it makes them a little harder to defeat.
Right. And the sigils, they get to roll 1 defensive dice against every unit attacking it.
Right.
It's that simple. I like this game.
Yeah.
And now I'll say that the graphic design, I'm not a huge fan of the graphic design on this game, but I like the gameplay. I really, really like it. Now, they've added some things, David, that we didn't get to play with. Obviously, in a 2-player game, you are just going directly at each other. There's no reason to flank or to go out really to the sides. It's all about a line driven. Now, they've added 2 things that we didn't get to play with. One of them was the Spoils of War, which will be locations around the board that will be seeded on the map that you can go to and get beneficial abilities by going to those locations and unlocking them.
Yeah, that's always cool, just to give you a little bit more to do, a little more to think about. Like, I could do this, I might die, so maybe I'll just run over here and pick this up. Yeah.
The other thing they're doing is they're adding outposts, which will be in front of you at the start of the game, but they have to be built by your warlord. Again, there'll be locations on the board that you'll have to basically waste a turn with your warlord by not doing anything and being adjacent to these outposts. Once you build the outposts, they give you unique abilities as well.
Very cool.
Again, terrain that will add more additions to the game and make it a little more flexible with what you can do and how you can approach battle.
Yeah, it really is a well thought out marriage between the base concept of Magic the Gathering card game and taking it to the table, like we said earlier. They really thought of so many things. I can't wait to actually play with some of those aspects that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
I have to say, one of the things that crept into my mind as soon as we opened this box is I saw the standees. Never been a huge fan of standees, but I'll say this about this. With miniatures in this game, it would be a lot harder to keep track of, because they have all the stats, some of the basic stats for all of the units.
Easily recognizable.
It's easily recognizable. We're both big fans of having as much information on the board as possible.
Yeah.
The less you can have to go, what's his stats again? The better, generally speaking. So I've come around to feeling like I think this is the right way to go with this.
Yeah.
Because you can very easily look out there. You don't have to, you're not referencing anything, really.
I love the asymmetrical aspect of it too. How different both of the factions that we've played with multiple times are completely different from one another. The good guys, so to speak, are I can't remember the name of them. They have they're very defensive. They'll sit back, they'll create territory controls, and then if you walk into those territory controls, some of them will allow you to pick them off. One of your warlords can just basically sit there and create mana by not moving or attacking every round. Each of them have a unique flavor. Your guys are all about creating multiple orcs quickly.
Get lots of units out there and having them run around and rush. Yeah, exactly.
So I can't wait to see what the other factions do.
Well, and the fact, too, is not just each faction, but like you said at the beginning, each faction comes with 2 different warlords, so even that gives you a significant difference in flavor. Like the 2 warlords we just played with yesterday that I had a choice of, one could have 10 units on the board, one I think could only have maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah.
That's a significant difference in how you're playing the game. Because if you play it once and you have a ton of units, especially if you're playing the goblins, it's a very different feel than when you have just over half of that number of units out there the next time. You have cards in your hand and you can't get them out. It's a really interesting. You have to adjust for sure.
Very approachable game. Very easy to learn.
I'm not a huge Magic the Gathering player from back in the day. You are.
Yeah.
And even you're able to approach this pretty easily. If you have some experience like that in the past, though, this will be nothing to pick up. I mean, you really could easily get right into a game of this.
Yeah. So, guys, that is Sigil, Powers of War. Make sure you guys make comments below. If you have questions for us, please make them in the comments. We'll answer them to the best of our ability. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, and everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.